If you've got a disc herniation or a lower back injury, there is one mistake that so many people make. It holds them back. It prevents them starting the rehab that they need to do. And in today's video, we're going to talk through that mistake. We're going to give you 3 principles that your rehab should have if you're going to be successful in recovering from lower back pain and sciatica. And we're also going to give you some additional points and some exercises specifically that you can do to help get rid of that back pain once and for all. If you're new here, welcome. I'm Michael Fatika, the lead osteopath and spine specialist here at Back in Shape. And we help people around the UK and all over the world fix their back pain from home and get back in shape for the long term. And hopefully today's video will be a turning point for you, because all too often we have members come to us, they've been struggling for a long period of time and they're looking for this special exercise, this unique set of exercises for them and their specific case. And unfortunately, this leads people to not doing anything to move forwards. And when you've finished this episode of the podcast, you'll hopefully have a different view, understand where that uniqueness needs to be applied to your rehabilitation, because it is vital in your success, but it comes from perhaps a place that you didn't quite thought it would. The first and most important thing is that it's not about the exercises per se, it's about the goal. And if we take a shift away from the exercise or specific exercise that you might be looking for and actually go, no, what do I need to do? My back is not healthy, it's injured, it's not getting better. I need to aim towards a healthy spine, and I need to do something that adheres to the principles that we're going to discuss today. So first, change your focus. Your focus is not getting out of pain. Your focus needs to be on what do I need to do to build a healthy, strong human spine. And you'll hear me talk about that human spine quite a lot on today's episode of the podcast, because we all have them. And we've had enough members and patients over the years with every single conceivable diagnosis that one could have for their back pain or sciatica. And they're all doing this. Everybody has a different journey, as we'll get to later. But this, if you follow these principles, it really will make a massive difference, because you're working towards building that healthy, strong human spine. But what does that even mean? We've broken it down into what we think are 3 central or core principles for a healthy back. And here is principle number 1. It's all about the control of that neutral spine. And it's probably best to start out with what a neutral spine actually means. And that is your lumbar spine. It's the maintenance of what's called this natural lordosis, this backward bending curve, being able to hold that still in spite of being pushed off in different directions, or weights or forces or daily life pulling you in different ways. And maybe you have experienced this right now, that you're just walking around in the kitchen or getting up to move out of the living room chair or out of the shops, and you turn one way and boom, that pain comes in. Think about it. It is movement that is the source, or is the cofactor in your flare-ups happening, the injuries happening. You didn't injure it still. You did a movement. And it's the lack of ability to control that neutral spine once you've had that injury that is holding you back. And therefore, this principle must be built first. And we can do that in different ways, which we'll get to later. Understanding that whenever any joint has been injured, it loses its integrity to maintain the neutral position, if we will. It doesn't work quite as well. And when we've injured the disc, the facet joints, the segment down here in this lower lumbar spine, most commonly L4-5 and L5-S1, that's L5, L4-5, and L5-S1 down here, the last 2 joints in the lumbar spine. When we've injured any of those structures, the mechanisms that brace and stabilize this area and tell our brain where it is in space are not going to be as effective. And we see this movement leaking into this area of the lower back, catching the injury, flaring it up, and now we're back in pain again. And we think that nothing works because we're doing things that do not maintain a neutral spine. They're moving in one way or other. Classic examples might be the knee hugs. They might be child's pose. They might be the cobra position. All of these things are not building this first principle of the ability to maintain a neutral spine. The second principle of a healthy spine is that it has the ability to bear load in an upright position, and over time in slightly compromised positions as well, because life is going to demand that you at the very least bear the load of your torso. And then you're going to probably have to bear the load of your torso plus some shopping bags or a toddler. The examples go on, but you must have an ability to bear load. And this can be trained in and trained out. Some extreme examples on opposite ends of the spectrum would be the astronaut that spends time in the International Space Station under a lower gravity environment and loses that ability to bear load, which is then rehabilitated when they come back down to Earth. The other end of that spectrum is the extreme powerlifter or high performance athlete that can bear hundreds of pounds of load without needing any sort of support, without having any sort of injury, and whilst maintaining integrity to not only the spine, but the hips, the knees, the ankles, the shoulders, the thoracic thoracic spine, etc. They have that resilience, that ability and capacity to bear load, specifically through the spine. And when they're bearing that load, their spine isn't wobbling or moving all over the place. It's stable. The third principle is one of good hip health and hip mobility. You'll notice that the vertebral blocks and the vertebral joints are not necessarily the most congruent joints. They're not particularly stable when we take them off in one way or other. Conversely, the hip is strong in more or less all ranges. It's really locked in that ball and socket, and therefore it plays a vital role in your lower back health, in helping you in the short term as you're recovering from the more severe flare-ups and you're more in that acute stage, to building back through the stages of rehab and also keeping your back healthy for the long term by doing more of the movement, so the lower back is less needed to get involved in particularly vulnerable positions, such as load bearing in an extremely forward bent position. If we think about the example of sitting down in a chair, if you can squat down slowly and you can only go part way because your hips are not very strong and they're not very flexible, then you have to drop yourself into the seat, or maybe you round the back forwards tremendously to lower yourself that last bit of motion. If your hips are both stronger and more flexible, in that order, by the way, then your hips are going to be able to move through a greater range of flexion, slowly lowering you down into the chair, and your spine gets to stay in a nice neutral position more or less the whole way down without having to pivot forwards, or worse still, bend and round forwards. So these are really the three core principles that you must have, and you must build them in that order. You need to have an ability to control the neutral spine, and you can start learning this with simple exercises, which we'll get to in a moment. Off weight bearing, you could do them on the bed, you could do them on the floor. And then you might do them on weight bearing, just your own body weight. And again, we'll get to those in a moment. And then you'll do them with extra load. And gradually over time, you'll realize that actually, do you know what? I haven't got a great range of motion in those hips, that last part coming in. I can't lower myself very far before my legs give out, before I'm just not strong enough or flexible enough to get any lower. And therefore, over time, you will improve that range of motion as the strength improvements and as the flexibility improves in those hips, which is all going to be have a knock-on, a positive effect on the overall health of that lower back for the long term. But in the short term, it's going to protect it more and more, so it's less vulnerable from daily flare-ups. Now, there are some additional points that you want to consider when we're choosing the right exercises for your specific case of back pain. Again, if you're a human being that needs to build a healthier, stronger spine because you have an injury there, this is going to be for you. So consider these points as supplementary. They're going to help inform what exercises we're going to choose. So point number one is the exercises need to actually be accessible. You need to be able to do them, whether you are bedbound, whether you've just finished surgery, or whether you're not actually that bad and maybe you're more of a chronic case and you have a reasonable degree of mobility on a daily basis. They need to be able to be done by all individuals, which means you need to be able to take maybe the designed exercise, for example, the dead bug, which we'll get onto a little bit later, which you're lying on the floor and you're moving one leg at a time whilst maintaining a neutral spine. But that can be regressed. That can be made easier and easier and easier, and start with just simply lying on your back with your knees bent, bracing and engaging the core correctly, and then initiating perhaps something like the psoas engagement, where we're lifting one leg up at a time without that spine moving. Yes, some of you will need to start from something that simple, but the good news is you can do that when you wake up in the morning, and you can learn that skill because you're already lying down. You don't have to get onto the floor, and then you can work your way back to the normal quote-unquote dead bug that's done on the floor. That might take a couple of weeks or even a month. For some people, they'll get it straight away and they won't even need to regress to that easier variation. But all of these exercises need to be accessible to everyone with back pain or everyone with a spine. The next step is vitally important. Otherwise, we're not going to address that second principle. And that is, we need to, once we've got these simplistic exercises and we've learned them to a basic level, we need to be able to scale the same exercise without having to learn new things, without having to try different exercises. And now for certain exercises, like the dead bug, for example, might have their limitations, but something like a squat or a hip hinge is hugely applicable to basically every human being on the planet, or more or less. Because right after you've had a surgery, the first thing you're going to do is squat to get out of the chair, maybe with some assistants, maybe with a Zimmer frame, maybe with some nurses there to support you. And you're going to go and sit on the toilet seat to check everything's working again. And right on the other end, as we mentioned earlier, you might be competing in a professional endeavor, sporting endeavor, having to bear hundreds of pounds on your back whilst doing a squat. It's scalable. It means you don't need to start learning different things or change everything up. You just keep doing what you're doing. And a slight adjunct to that, if at all possible, which it is, by the way, for your back pain rehab, is that we want to make these movements as true to life as possible, something that's going to have spillover benefits immediately in our daily life. So for example, the squat and the hip hinge, as I've mentioned, with the addition of the step up, all three of those are activities or movements that you are going to be doing. Every single one of you with back pain is going to be doing those movements every day, and realizing this is a vital point of understanding. If we're doing some abstract exercise on a Swiss ball, bouncing on one leg while sipping a cup of tea or something silly, some of these exercises are really quite peculiar with lots of different things all over the place. It's not very applicable to daily life, and therefore we struggle to get benefits crossing over immediately. Whereas if we're starting to learn how to competent squat, we become immediately more aware of how far we can squat competently before our form goes. And therefore, when we're getting out of chairs, we might need to adjust the chairs we're sitting on in the short term. We might need to be a bit more cautious, a bit more careful when we're getting in and out of the car. We immediately get these spillover benefits of awareness. And then as our technique improves on the squat in our workout time or our rehab time, it's also going to spill over and benefit us when we're getting up and down out of the dining table chair or getting in and out of the car, as I mentioned a moment ago. This next point is it must be simple. Like I mentioned with the tea and the Swiss ball example, it needs to be a simple set of exercises that make up the fundamentals, the core, if you will, of the rehab work that you're doing. And if we have that simplicity, we can continue to execute over time. And the simple reason for this is that it takes a bit of time, some longer than others, to start to learn how to do these exercises effectively. And that learning time has the opportunity for mistakes and flare-ups to happen, which is just a necessary part. No one is going to avoid that. We have to learn those things. And then once we've learned that, we can find the right sort of intensity or difficulty of that exercise that really challenges us, and then we can progress on from there. But if every time we get to a certain milestone, we're having to learn brand new exercises in brand new ways with brand new equipment, we're never going to really be able to just gather some real momentum on the rehab front. And we do need to make that rehab front, that momentum on the rehab front to really improve the status quo and health in our lower back. And that leads me perfectly onto this last point here, which is progress. You need to make sure that you are progressing what you are doing. There's nothing worse than speaking to someone who's got long-standing lower back pain. And they've been doing maybe even the right exercise, right? You've been doing a squat or you've been doing a dead bug, and you were doing 3 sets of 10 6 months ago, and you're still doing 3 sets of 10 with the same weights, let's say in the example of the squat. You have to move it on. You have to progress things, albeit there will be some points at which you can perhaps plateau for a period of time, but too many people do not progress. They say, oh, I'm just doing these exercises. Why are you doing these exercises? I don't know. They're the exercises I got told to do. I'm just going to keep doing them. It's like, no, you have to do them in a progressive manner, which means that you have to factor in periods where you will then increase the resistance, increase the challenge, so you can build up the strength in the hips, in the back, in the core, etc., in the spine. And we're actually adhering particularly to those principles 2 and 3 that we mentioned at the start. More and more, we've been trying to distill the essential exercises that everybody needs to do and can do so that it's a very, very concise list that actually is broad reaching in its ability to rehabilitate someone with a lower back injury, no matter what the condition is. And the exercises that we're really leaning towards more and more these days are going to be the dead bug and the marching bridge, which are the essentials of learning how to adhere to that pillar number 1 or principle number 1 of learning to maintain a neutral spine, because they're so very safe, they're so very low risk that everybody can do them. Even if they're starting on the bed, they can break them down into something that's even easier. And then we've got the exercises like the squat, the hip hinge, and the step up. And there are other variations of the step up or single leg exercises, such as a reverse lunge or such as a split squat, which can be used a little bit later on, but they're very analogous of the step up itself. And these are exercises that you're already doing every day, so they're true to real life, like we mentioned earlier, but they are vital at continuing that principle 1 of being able to control a neutral spine in spite of moving the body, maybe with a significant amount of load, maybe with load on one side of the body, but also building up the strength and resilience of the spine through the use of more and more load over time, because you can scale all of these infinitely almost over the course of time with weighted vests, with bands, with resistance of various sorts. And also you can build the range of motion that you're going through these to improve that mobility and strength at the level of the hips and arguably the knees and ankles as well. So we've mentioned all this stuff, and it sounds very simplistic, which hopefully you should realize that by now is a vital key of getting good long-term back rehab underway. But also, where does it tailor to you? Because this doesn't sound like, the special exercises for your specific back. And here is that secret sauce. With all of the above bits we've mentioned, the principles, etc., once you've got that strategy down, the unique part comes in how you execute that over time, in where the blocks for you are going to be. And it's worthwhile going through the process. Some of you will get straight in and you'll do some of those exercises and you'll have absolutely no problem. You can maintain a neutral spine. You can start to increase the spine's ability to bear load. You can improve your range of motion and strengthen the hips. And then boom, you hit a block and you can't go any further and it's flaring at your back. And that's the point that's unique for you. It means that you're not necessarily as diligent when you start scaling the weights. You're getting into bad old habits. You're pushing yourself too hard. You're letting movements leak into the spine when you've got 15, 20, 30, 50 kilos that you're doing your squats with, for example. Those of you that are in the the fitness industry that have a background in working out, you are much more at risk of that happening because you will often be very diligent and have a level of experience in the background that really carries you through. But then you hit that block, and that's the unique part for you. Conversely, the other person might struggle to even lie on their back and engage their core because they've tried lots of knee hugs and pelvic tilts and all that sort of stuff, maybe through yoga and Pilates in the past, and they've got a lot of mobility, but they really struggle to actually bring that stability even on the off weight bearing exercises on the floor. And so they need to spend more time mastering that, but they have to go through that process rather than try and skip around and go and do some other stuff, because it's much better to go through this in a step-by-step manner, building up rather than skipping out core fundamentals that might actually be missing, even though you've tried variations or versions of those exercises in the past. Too many people, more or less everybody in fact, who's gone through the membership or patients have seen us, have done a squat before, they've done a dead bug, they've done bridges, but they haven't done them focusing on those principles. They haven't done them with proper technical approach. They said do some squats, and like, yeah, sure, I'd bounce up and down a few times, but they haven't done it with thought, care, and attention and detail. And that is really what makes all the difference. I hesitate to say there's probably next to no members of the program or patients I've seen that haven't done one or some of the exercises already. But they're looking for something often that is unique. I need a special set of exercises. No, you need a special bit of help to help you do these things properly, to help you go through that process of building a strong and healthy spine. Now, I won't go through all the different variations and challenges that you might or might not have as you go through the process of adhering to the ability to maintain a neutral spine with ever more load and challenge, to strengthen up the spine's ability to bear load and improve the strength and health of the hips and joints below the hips in the body so that the back can be more protected in the short term from flare-ups, can start to heal effectively and properly rehabilitate for the long term. That is the goal here, and the uniqueness will be in your journey, the unique challenges, the unique difficulties, the things that trigger flare-ups for you that you need to hunker down in, pay extra attention and focus in on so that you can overcome those challenges and do that particular exercise at that variation with that amount of resistance, weight, or challenge without flaring up your back and losing composure. Ultimately, the different possibilities are endless, but it's down to you to really work at these things and be a student. Don't approach the exercises in a lackluster attitude. I'm just doing my exercises, but be a student of the process, reflect on things. And that is one of the reasons why with the program, we always have it with that support. It's why we invest the time, effort, and energy to do live sessions every single week to help our members with these challenges, because it's not about the program. It's about your journey through the program of building spine strength and building a healthy spine again. It's not about where exactly you have the pain. It's about which bits you can't do that cause the pain to come on and how you go about overcoming those, which is why we also have the group where we help members work through these challenges, because they're going to come up week in, week out, month in, month out. But over time, they happen less and less and less as you gather momentum, as healing takes place, as strengthening takes place, and you become more aware of your body as you build a healthier and stronger spine. Hopefully, if you've made it this far, you have found this a helpful one. I know it's not had much in the way of demonstration, but that's because we have tons of tutorial videos on the website and on the YouTube channel, which you can check out after. Hopefully, this is really just reassess or giving you pause to reassess your approach and thought about the uniqueness of the exercises that you might or might not need. You've realized that actually you just need to build a strong and healthy spine. And these are some of the fundamentals that will get you there. And maybe you need a little bit of more support in evaluating the difficulties that you have in actually building up that strength and stability in your spine. If you did find this helpful and you know someone else that's struggling with their lower back, consider sharing this with them. It should hopefully make them think about a few things as well and ultimately unlock some of the progress that they can make and start to feel like they're in control of their lower back health again, and they're not at the whim of any silly movement that'll set them back to the bed again. As always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.